My guest is actually someone that I have known. I was trying to think about this. Maybe he can clarify. I think 7 or 8 years, though, at least.
2007, about
2007.
This month, November of 2007.
Wow. Okay. Wow. You're way better at this than me.
No,
So,
was the very first conference I ever went to. So that would have been the Chet Snow. No, it would have been the Crash Retrieval Conference in Las Vegas.
In November of 07? Is that when that? No, that was maybe, yeah. So that's 8 years ago. Almost 9 years ago.
Yeah.
Because February of 2016 will be 9 years. Well, this is Mike Clelland. I was actually going to introduce you properly, but now you just.
Oh, I ran right over that. I'm sorry.
You totally did. But I just want to say.
I'll back off.
Mike is one of the. He's one of the most unusual and cool guys in this field, honestly. And in the years that I've known him, I just wanted to say, I often was thinking this is a guy who is so thoughtful. He's so smart and so creative, and I guess original is really the word. I think original really covers it. And the other thing about Mike back in those earlier years is that he was very obviously struggling with his own experiences and trying to figure out like what is it that's happened to me. Well, he's gone through this amazing process of thinking and writing and not just that, but opening himself up to the world through an incredible blog site, which is hiddenexperience.blogspot.com, and then wrote this book, which is in my opinion. It's not just a great book, it's a beautiful book. And it's really about his firsthand experiences with these very difficult to describe events, these elusive events that have become really what his life is all about. The other thing about Mike that's really worth knowing is he's a very active outdoorsman. He's a great illustrator and a professional illustrator who's written a number of books on backpacking and survival in extreme conditions, and he's an expert in the skills of ultralight backpacking. He's just a cool guy, and we're almost the exact same age, which gives us another kind of thing, a connection. So that's it, and this is the author of The Messengers, Owls, Synchronicity, and the UFO Abductee, Mike Clelland. Michael, now welcome, and thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. You're very welcome.
But thanks for highlighting or at least clarifying how long we've known each other. So if it was February of 07, that would be almost 9 years.
Yeah, somewhere around there. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's correct.
I remember that conference, and now that you mentioned that conference, I remember when we met. But that was the first time, I guess, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah, I remember talking to you in the hall, being very nervous. Yeah.
Really? Wow.
I was nervous about the whole thing. I mean, I was nervous about being there. It was my very first conference. I was meeting people that, fit my profile in a way. So
it's true. And but even then, you were actually very you had this openness about you and a willingness, I think, to explore and really just wonder. A lot of people will have difficult experiences and they just kind of go retreat inward. And you didn't really do that. You really actively explored it. You confronted the, I guess fears might be the right word for it. I don't know how you would describe it. And you just went after it and tried to grapple with it. And you ended up doing some amazing things, in my opinion.
Well, I mean, I'm not sure. I mean, a lot of the written stuff for the blog was, and I say it very clearly, in the blog has been self-therapy. That was my own form of self-therapy that I didn't have anyone to turn to. So I had to, I kind of did it in a very, very public way, and curiously, like doing it in such a public way on a format, it required me to it wasn't just something I scribbled in a diary and then pushed on a shelf. I really had to make sure my, I spell checked things and I'm, got to play art director, and I was, drawing a lot of things that would represent my memories. Yeah.
Well, that's exactly it. And you did not only that, but you also have Blog Talk Radio. Well, not Blog Talk Radio, but you have a podcast.
I haven't done a single podcast in over a year now. It's actually been a year and about a week since I've done a podcast, and
overdue, I think.
Yeah, and I think I just completely threw myself into this the book thing, and
Right.
I would kind of sit there and say, oh, I have a choice. Do I work on the book or do I work on a podcast? And the podcasts that I was doing, I would edit them and
Hmm.
do a fair amount of research, and I was trying to, so I prepped them, and then I did a lot of post production on them. So there
Very
was a
time
few days
consuming.
work into any time I did one,
Yes.
but there's probably over, I think it's about 240 or 250 hours worth of podcasts all logged on my site.
Yeah, that's fantastic, and they're great. And you've interviewed some really amazing people on them. Very worth checking out at hiddenexperience.blogspot.com. The only thing I just want to say about your book before you talk about it is it seems to me like the big well, and as I said in the past segment, I don't know if you were listening or not, but I do personally have a vested interest in this book. So that's my disclosure about the book. And I have no bones about saying that. I'm the publisher of this book and spent the last 2 months quite a lot of time going over every sentence of that book and going over it with you at times. So that's my interest in this, but I wouldn't have wanted to have an interest in this book if I didn't believe in it from the beginning, and it's just vastly exceeded anything I could have imagined. But what I want to say is it's not simply and I want to call it an original book, which it absolutely is, but the takeaway that I keep getting after I've read this book is that the synchronicities that you describe in your stories and the stories of countless other people that you who've written to you about what they've gone through gives one this unsettling feeling, it seems to me, or it could be unsettling to those of us who are committed to a kind of like Western-based materialistic cause and effect sort of reality that we get from Isaac Newton's vision of what our reality is, I suppose, and instead, I come away with this feeling that there's this grand overarching intelligence that's not simply looking at us benignly from above, like God in the Bible or something like that, but that is actively working our reality and communicating to us and giving us clues and messages that our reality isn't what it seems. And your research seems to indicate that one of the key one method for that communication is the use of owls as messengers, as you call them. And that's just such a crazy thought. And then you tie it in with UFO sightings and apparent abduction experiences. But then the very last thing I just want to say is you tie all of that in not simply to possible extraterrestrial intelligences, that is, real owls being connected in one way or another with UFO sightings or encounters with, let's say, alien beings, but also to synchronicities, also to ancient archetypes, dreams, shamanistic experiences, magic, personal transformation, and even death itself, which really is the ultimate transformation. And somehow you managed to bring all of that into this book. And I think that's what makes it just so fascinating to me. And the fact that you did it reminds me of the work of people like John Keel, Jacques Vallée to a certain extent. But in my personal opinion, I think in some ways, your work has gone even beyond that. I know that's a
Well,
lot to say, but that's
yeah, yikes. Yeah. Thank you. I mean, when I didn't start it off, it didn't start out that way. All that happened was I had a set of owl experiences that hit me pretty hard, and that would have been in 2006, in the autumn of 2006. And after that, I guess it would have been the fall of 2007 that we met. So that would have been right around the same time that I, first started stepping into the
yeah.
UFO conference scene and actually picking up the phone and calling people kind of thing. And one of the questions I would ask, and this was completely selfish on my part, I was curious because of my own direct experience, was I would just ask people, it's like, well, have you ever had any odd experiences with owls? And it certainly wasn't 100%, but with enough consistency that it was remarkable. People would say, well, that's funny you should ask that because I do have this really odd owl story. And somewhere along the line there, I started archiving these things and I started writing them down and I started keeping files of this stuff. And in a funny way, I had this kind of sense that, like, oh, I'll just I'll just, this owl thing, that's got to be a tidy, like, how to say it. Like if a junior high school student came home and said like, I want to do a report on World War II, like any, the thinking dad, the thoughtful dad in the house would say, whoa, let's narrow that down a little bit. And then the kid would say, how about Japan, and in the South Pacific, and let's narrow it down. And so they would, from, one battle to then eventually just a one person's experience on one day might be a good report. And I thought that's what owls would be, like, oh, this is as tiny a little fractal at the far corner of this phenomena as it could be, just this very simple little thing. I just thought I would write up a little magazine article about it and be done.
Right.
And I did write something like a, magazine article length thing in the summer of 2013, and immediately realized, actually, who it was? It was Nick Redfern contacted me. He was one of the first people to comment on this thing. It's about a 40-page essay on my site. And that's the foundation of the book, is that essay.
Yes.
And Nick got back to me right away and said, "This is a book. This is a full book. You need to write this as a book." And I knew that just as I was finishing it. It's like, oh, I gotta follow this through.
Would you care to tell? Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah. So that was a few years ago, and so the next couple of years, my life was dominated with owls.
Well, right. I'm wondering if you would mind sharing the initial oddities that you had with owls, just so people can have an idea what you're talking about. Like when you talk about weird experiences with owls, like how are they weird? Why are they weird? And because I think it's really helpful for people to have the particulars, at least in some of these instances of what you're talking about.
Well, the initial event took place in October, I think it was actually September of 2006. And I was living in Idaho at the time, and I worked for this outdoor school. And I had been gone all summer and came back to my little town. And there was a school that I worked for, and they had a branch office in that town. And I, met this woman at the office, and I said something to the effect of, "Oh, you've been here all summer. You must have been camping out a lot." I was living in a beautiful place right near the Grand Teton National Park. And she said, "Oh, no, I haven't camped once." And I said, "Oh, that's terrible." And I was very into this lightweight backpacking thing. And it was one of the things that you can do is just hike off into the hills for a single night and carry very little on your back. So you don't have the drudgery of a great big heavy backpack. And I said, "Listen, let's go out for a single night. The weather's beautiful. It'd be great." And this was a complete stranger. And we went off into the mountains, and we actually left in the afternoon. And within a few hours, sun stays up fairly late, even that time of the year. And within a few hours, we were pretty deep into the mountains. And I know exactly where we were in this lovely spot. And I was sitting on a big flat rock, and I was cooking dinner. And there came a point in the conversation. Now the sun was setting and the moon was rising. It was just amazingly spectacular scene. Northern Rockies, just amazing. And there came a point in the conversation where she was saying something. And I remember right at the moment being kind of like, struck that, wow, this is really interesting. Like I'm really impressed. This is a really interesting person. This is like the conversation had a depth to it that sort of took my breath away.
Right.
And right at that moment, an owl flew over us. And then a second owl. And then a third owl. And then for the next, I'm going to say till the sun was fully down, owls were flying over us, these three owls, and they would land near us, and they would land on branches near us. And we cleaned up our dinner, and then we laid our sleeping bags down on the ground and just slept out under the stars. And, it got fully nighttime, and these owls were still flying above us. And, there's a point so you're lying on your back looking straight up at the stars in your sleeping bag, and then the stars would be blotted out for just 1 second. It was totally silent. It just felt like a light switch got turned the stars off. And it was the owls would fly, and they were swooping really close to our faces. And they would, they didn't make any noise, so there was nothing to hear. Mm-hmm. So that happened once, and afterwards we were like, "Well, that was pretty cool." Right. And I said, "Hey, if I go out camping again, I'll give you a call." So 4 days later, I called her up. Her name is Kristen. Mm-hmm. And I said, "Let's go camping one more night." And she said, "Great." So we went out to another place, completely different spot in the Tetons. And we were up pretty high at this point. We'd left earlier in the morning and hiked in pretty deep. And we were in this amazing plateau that not many people camp on. And it was cold that night, unlike the other night, which was a beautiful, calm night. This was kind of windy and cold and gray.
Mm-hmm.
And so I said, let's hike up to that hill over there just before sunset. And then we can warm up as we walk uphill. And then when we climb into the sleeping bags, we won't be so cold.
Yeah.
And so, because it was kind of chilly just standing around. We had a tent set up. So we walked up to the hill, and as soon as we got to the top of this hill, the sun was setting. It was this gray, sort of gloomy, dreary evening. And as soon as we got up to the hill, an owl landed on a branch near us. And then a second owl, and then a third owl. So within 4 days,
and this seems quite unusual. I mean, to have so many owls, am I wrong? I'm not an outdoorsman the way you are, but it seems like an odd thing that you would have so many owls converging around you at like in the middle of or is that?
Oh,
is that
well, I am an outdoorsman, and when I work with outdoorsmen people, and I've told the story a lot.
Exactly.
And like people stare at me. People who've spent a lot more time in the mountains than I have, will stare at me and say, "Oh, that's never happened to me."
Right. Okay. I thought so. I just wanted to make sure.
That's very unusual. It doesn't, it's not uncommon. Sometimes you will occasionally see owls clustered together. And they're curious, and they'll come and investigate things and stuff. So it is not uncommon to see a few owls together, and they'll come in, but to hang out with you for a few hours. Now, this evening, it was getting dark early, and so these owls probably only hung out for us a half hour. But I mean, they landed on the ground next to us so close that, it was, I've never experienced that. As close as a, pigeon would land to you in the sidewalk in New York City. They were,
yeah, very close.
Yeah, 10 feet away or less.
Yeah.
And we were had to have it happen once was, mind-boggling. And to have it happen twice was absolutely mystical. Now, there's a bunch of other synchronicities connected with this.
Well, right, which makes this really, I think, the powerful story that it is. Good.
So I had this written up as a diary entry, and I just posted it on the blog. This would have been the very first day of the blog. It was just there was 3 different stories, and this was one of them. And after I posted it, I thought to myself, I need to get a hold of Kristen and ask her what we were talking about, because I wrote it in the essay. I remember there's this very mystical thing that we were talking about at the moment the first owls arrived on the first night. And so she had long since moved out of the town where I had lived, and I hadn't, been in touch with her much, but I did have her number. So I called her up and I said, listen, I have to know, what were you talking about the very first night when the very first owl appeared? And she said, oh, I remember exactly what I was talking about. She said, I was giving my most heartfelt definition of what God means to me. And that took this already powerful experience and just made it like transcendent. I was shocked. I was floored by the power of what she had said. So from that point on, I was, I took the owl thing very seriously as a form of not so much research initially, but just like I made sure to ask anyone who's had any weird experiences if they've had any owl experiences. And I kept on coming up with story after story after story. It was this untapped, well of profoundly incredible accounts.
Yes,
and
indeed.
my sense is that what I was finding, people throughout history have found that same thing. I mean, there's a reason why there's so much mythology surrounding the owls. There's a reason that shamans all over the world, all over the ages, have a folklore, have a set of symbols and deeper meanings associated with the owls. And my sense is that what I experienced and what Kristen experienced and what plenty of other people have experienced can be traced back to the owl as performing some sort of ritual. If we turn the clock back 1,000 years and we were all living out on the plains of North Dakota in our teepees, we would be, I'm convinced, well versed in the lore of the animals that are around us. We don't. We live in this world with computers and traffic and deadlines and stuff like that, and we are adrift and cut off from that core mythology. That core mythology that is still very vital and alive, though we just simply don't have we whether the eyes to see it or the patience to see it or the resources to see it. Now, all that said is, doing Google research and looking into books and things like that, it's out there. I mean, the mythology of owls, and other people have written poetically about owls. So,
well, you wrote actually very eloquently, in my opinion, about the archetype of the owl, and how. Why the owl is something that, as you put it, peers into the darkness literally because of their incredible eyesight and their ability to navigate through the darkness, maybe better than any other animal we know of. And that as a metaphor through human mythology for an ability to peer through the darkness of the mysteries of life and the mysteries of beyond that life. And I think that figures, significantly into your work.
Well, so the archetype thing when I stumbled on the archetype as a term, as a definition, it was at that point that so many puzzle pieces just clicked into place. The archetype as a umbrella concept that covers everything works so cleanly that it just feels right. I don't know if it is right, but it just certainly feels right. And archetype is one of those, it's a big word that I'm sure, philosophy students in the universities, would wrestle over and have for decades or centuries. But, it's a very elusive thing to understand. And Plato initially talked about the archetype. I could look up some notes here and sort of read from things, but and then the archetype was revisited by Carl Jung as a sort of thought form that is inherited through our consciousness somehow. It's ever present in the consciousness of all people, in the collective consciousness, that there are these archetypal images. I mean, the hero. Luke Skywalker is the perfect archetype of the hero, and so if owls are presenting themselves, they are presenting themselves for a reason. I don't think it's the owl sort of making a decision to show up at a certain time at a certain point. I think it's just the magic of the power of the cogs and the clock mechanisms of the universe itself just place the owl at the appropriate place at the appropriate time.
Yeah. We're going to head to a break in a couple of minutes, and I really want to explore the idea of the owl as an archetype when we get back, but also the connection of owls to genuine, apparent UFO abduction types of experiences, because I think that's kind of key to what you're doing. The idea of the archetype, though, just when we're talking about what does the owl signify, it doesn't just mean wisdom, although it does kind of represent that, but it represents, if you wrote in your book, death, transition, transformation. All of these things that actually, in your the research and the stories that have come to you, and in your own particular story, the owls seem to appear at moments of transformation, and that can include a UFO sighting, and that can include a number of other things as well. So I just think that's I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, and I mean that's one of the problems with all this mythology about owls. It's so open ended. I mean, I could cherry pick the data. Mm-hmm. I could just read and glean a passage here and a passage there from dusty old books on mythology and make it fit my hypothesis. I worked hard not to do that. I felt myself every once in a while being led down. Some are much more, I tried to do the stuff that resonated strongly with me, but at the same time I had to keep an open mind and make sure to say that the mythology of the owl is so rich, across all the world's traditions, and there are certain themes, death being one of them, that are associated with the owl, and I would think that death and darkness would be sort of a synonym in a mythological or folkloric sense.
Yes, indeed. All right. Well, look, we're at the top of the hour, so we have 1 hour to go. I'm having a great conversation here with Mike Clelland, author of The Messengers, Owls, Synchronicity, and the UFO Abductee. You can learn about it at Mike's website, which is hiddenexperience.blogspot.com. richarddolanpress.com. You can also check it out at richarddolanpress.com. There's a lot of information about it. Anyway, we will be right back after this here on KGRA. Back on Richard Dolan here with my guest and colleague Mike Clelland, talking about his new book, The Messengers, Owls, Synchronicity, and the UFO Abductee. A fantastic book, fascinating book. I just want to mention one more time, I will again be appearing at the A&B Conference, the Architects of the New Paradigm Conference, January 16th to 17th, 2016. It's next month in San Rafael, California. I mentioned it before. I want to mention it again. Go to anpconference.com. I'm excited about this. If you're in the Bay Area, if you can get to this, I think you will be excited as well. Great people there. And I don't think you'll be disappointed. Okay, back to our conversation, Mike. So this idea of owls and UFOs and abductions, of course, there's a whole issue of screen memory, and you had something to say about that.
Well, I wanted to, because anyone who's read a book or two, or 10 or 20 on the abduction lore, will be very familiar with the screen memory aspect of it. And the implication is that the UFO occupants are somehow masking their own selves in the form of something else. They're screening themselves using some sort of psychic or telepathic means.
Right.
What is often reported is that people will be driving down lonely highway at night, and well, here, I'll just tell a story. So this was at a UFO conference. I was sitting in the UFO experiencer support group, and I'm pretty sure it was run by Leo that year, Leo Sprinkle.
Leo Sprinkle, sure.
And this would have been at this back in Laughlin when they were still down in Laughlin, the now called the UFOC. Well, I guess it was still called that then. So in Laughlin, Nevada, this little room. It's kind of tacky, a hotel, little conference room kind of thing, and there's this one guy off in the corner. This goes on for about 2 hours. Everyone talking. It's like an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. People sit and raise their hand and tell their experiences. And there's a camaraderie that you can get from this. But this one guy sitting off in the corner kind of waits to the end. He kind of cautiously raises his hand and he says, "Has anyone here had any odd experiences with owls?" And the guy literally almost fell out of his chair when everyone in the room, including me, everyone in the room raised their hand at the same time. Not quite everyone, but enough that it was, he could tell he was sort of startled.
Right.
And then he went on to tell a story of where he had been driving along the road at night, and there was this great big tall owl on the side of the road, this 4-foot tall owl. So he kind of pulls up alongside and rolls his window down and looks right at this thing. And the owl looks back at him and standing right at the edge of the highway, and he gets this really bad feeling, like uh-oh,
right,
like the owl's mad at him. The owl, he's not allowed there, so he drives on. And it was some time later that he's a professional photographer. He was taking photographs of an owl nest near his home. He's out in the woods shooting this owl nest. And he sees the real owls in the nest, and he has immediate thought, I don't think that was a real owl I saw. He went through hypnotic regression to try to dig into this, and nothing really came out except that the owl that he saw was wearing boots. But this is, the implication is what he saw on the side of the road wasn't an owl. Now, I'll say, as someone who's immersed myself in this, owls simply do not grow to be 4 foot tall.
No, they do not. And the whole idea of boots really makes you wonder, alien or human, right?
Yes, exactly. Well,
what are we really dealing with?
It's a funny little story, but so owls, there's no owl that's going to be 4 foot tall. I got a lot of accounts where people will pull right up to an owl in the road, literally almost touching their car to the owl. The owl doesn't move and stares at them over the hood of the car. Now, a real owl, there's no owl on Earth that could be standing on the pavement. You could pull right up to it. You'd have to be in a little, a big wheel or something like that to actually have a view of them. You wouldn't, any car in the world, they would be hidden by the hood. But that's not what people are reporting.
No, and you had a couple of these screen memory cases that you are familiar with, but by and large, you're not talking about that.
Well, that's an important thing because a few things. Why are so the implication is the aliens are abducting these people or having some sort of contact experience, that people are under hypnotic regression. They would tell of an elaborate scenario where they were then, escorted by gray. They initially see an owl. Somewhere along the lines, they realize it's not an owl. They're escorted from their vehicle or their bedroom or their backyard or their bicycle, and then taken on board a craft. The typical abduction stuff happens. They're escorted out of the vehicle, back into their car, and then there comes this amnesia, and then they have no memory. There's a seamless, or oftentimes not so seamless, because they might later realize, like, wait a minute, I'm missing some hours of time.
Right.
So the question then becomes, why are the aliens choosing owls? Now, one way to look at it, which is logical, is a very simple avenue of thought, is that the owls have great big eyes. They're kind of pale. They're kind of spooky. There's something you would see at night, an owl. Mm-hmm. And they sort of look like an alien.
Right.
So the aliens, the gray aliens, may be choosing the owl. Specifically, it's convenient disguise, convenient screen, because it fairly clearly mimics themselves.
Sure.
That story gets repeated over and over again to the point where it's a form of dogma in a way, and I'm very cautious to trust that. The question might be, back to archetypes, they may be choosing the owl as a symbolic image rather than a convenient image. Was that Jenny? Was Jenny the dog right in the background?
I think it was.
Okay. Hold on, I'm gonna have to take a drink of water. Just a second.
Are we okay here?
Yeah. Was that Jenny, Rich?
I had to let my dog out of the room. I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
Oh, no, I did great. I carried it all the way through. I heard a whining dog, and I asked if that was Jenny, and then Ray said, "I think that was Jenny."
My apologies.
No,
we'll cut that. We'll cut that from the final MP3.
Hell no, it's staying in.
No. Okay.
Okay. So the question remains: why owls? Why are they? If this is
Exactly.
If the aliens are using these owls, and there's plenty of evidence, albeit anecdotal, but there's plenty of it that says that these owls are showing up as a screen memory, and eventually it's uncovered, or the experiencer realizes later that it was not an owl, it was something altogether different. Mm-hmm. Why are they choosing the owl? My answer, speculation only, is that the owls would be playing an archetypal role, and these gray aliens know the power of the archetype, and they are tapped into the reason the archetypes exist.
Aha. Yes. Very. That's. I don't think anyone has thought of that before.
I'm gleaning. Well, actually, that's not true, because there was a woman, Jacqueline Smith, who articulated that very clearly, and she had. She was channeling at the time. Should I tell that story?
Whatever you like. I think it's useful to give an idea of some of the interesting connections that your owl research has had in connection with actual UFO sightings, UFO possible abduction, possibly just intense encounters. You did mention that owls do seem to appear in some ways in an uncanny way just before or right after an odd UFO sighting. You got quite a few of those that you've collected. I think what you feel is most interesting, and if you're in a groove you want to talk about that particular.
Yeah, good. So here everyone brings up the owls as screen memories. So that's part of it. I address it in the book very thoroughly. I've got some great stories, and then I feel you have to move on beyond that, because that's not what people are reporting. To me, that's not the really interesting stuff that people are reporting. A very simple case, which is the first one I talk about in the book, and it's actually one of the first ones that arrived in my email inbox. And I've befriended this guy. His name is Derek, and he told a story. He told me a story. He was camping out in the desert and with a friend, and it was the first time ever camping in the desert. And he was super blown away by the whole scene. And then all of a sudden, he looks up, and it's nighttime, and him and his friend are kind of lying in their sleeping bags, looking up at the sky, and there's an owl on the top of a big tall cactus. They're kind of, like, whoa, that's eerie. I didn't see it fly in. Did you see it? No, I was spooky, huh? And so the next thing they know, whoosh, whoosh, the thing flies off. A few minutes later, a triangle-shaped UFO, a triangle-shaped craft, flies directly over them and continues on down the terrain. They were in a big, wide open valley, kind of a canyon. And he described this craft hugging the terrain in this very odd, almost fish-like manner.
Mm-hmm.
So there is, and he had a couple days later, he had another sighting of a sort of a bright silvery dot in the sky following his car and zooming over his car. And then he went on to describe like a handful of other things, experiences that, bloody noses as a child, unusual dreams, sort of psychic experiences. Right. And then he even goes on to say that he had like a spiritual awakening that he ties into all this stuff. So here's all of this. His whole narrative is preceded, is kind of introduced by an owl. And, that shows up. That's a very clean example. Some of them aren't so clean and some of them are a little more scrambled. But so there's a story of an owl showing up, in conjunction with a UFO. I have one fellow who contacted me from New Zealand, and he told a story of he had been recording with a video camera UFOs at night. So he would go out and can capture this odd footage.
Yes.
And then he went out one night and saw this orb in the sky and then realized there was an owl on the phone line directly above him also looking up at the orb. So both him and the owl were looking at this floating orb, and he would look at the owl and the owl would look at him, and they would look at the orb and they would look at each other. And so the joke I make is that, I'm not sure if that qualifies as a multiple witness case,
right,
but
exactly.
So, that's an owl in direct,
right.
I mean, basically the owl very aware of a floating orb, hovering above this fellow in his home.
Right. Yeah, these owls are showing up in very odd. It seems uncanny to me, and as you're pointing out in these stories and in some of the others in your collection, your book, they almost strike me as like catalysts. I mean, you call them messengers; that's a good word for them, but also catalysts that seem to trigger deeper reflection by the individuals involved that I think cause them to kind of develop a kind of recognition about important things. They seem to be catalyzing the transformation as well as sort of being present during some of these important moments in someone's life.
And that's right out of the lore. That's right out of the literature. I mean, the owl in many cultures is the totem of the shaman, and the shaman is the person who goes within to confront, the deeper questions of existence.
Could you tell? Oh, I'm so sorry.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, I was just wondering, along these lines, one of the most striking stories to me, and I think to you as well, concerns two women. I happen to know who both of these women are as well. They're within the UFO community. I guess a lot of us know each other, and they're known to me, and I'm friends with them, and you know them. You've interviewed them, and they had two incredibly oddly parallel stories connecting owls and UFOs in a really weird way. And it just seems to me that it's an interesting story. It's a puzzling story, and it's kind of a beautiful and fascinating story all at once.
And it was also, so there was a handful of accounts that came in what I call back-to-back stories. Some of them came in less than 24 hours apart. The other ones came in a few days apart, but these stories parallel each other enough that it's striking. And I have to include myself in this too, because the way they arrived for me had a power, and I recognize that power. So the first story would have been this woman, Susan Kornacki. She's open, she's out, she's talking about her experiences. She's very clear that she's had these contact experiences in her life. She, in the book, I share a couple things in her, one thing in particular in her youth, where her grandfather always had a story to tell. And he would tell a story that, he went out fishing. I think it was fishing. He was in the woods and he was driving home and he was all alone in the car. And he hears this voice in his head that says, "Don't turn left." And he looks and there's an owl sitting in the passenger seat looking up at him, and he gets totally freaked out, and he turns left, and he gets in a car accident. And then after the car accident, the owl's gone. He never knows quite what to think. Did an owl fly in the car? What happened? Why did the owl talk to him? How does an owl talk? So that's the story that Susan Kornacki grew up with, that Grandpa would always tell. Now, she was a young mother, and her husband, I think they had, I want to be very careful what I say because I don't remember it off the top of my head. They're now divorced. Her husband is now divorced, but they had a daughter, and they were at a family Easter party, and she was suddenly struck by this feeling at the Easter party where it was like, oh my God. She said she had a feeling. She said it was like a Tesla coil going up her spine, going off up her spine. Like, so some people would call that a Kundalini experience. And I've asked her about that. Do you think this was a Kundalini experience? And she said, no, it was different. It was like this. But so there's a very powerful energy sense that she had. She goes home. She's home all alone. Her husband was going to bring her daughter home a short time later. So she left the party early, and she goes out to her backyard and lies in the hammock to try to, come to terms with this weird sensation she has. Now, as soon as she lies in the hammock, an owl lands on the tree, so that you can visualize a hammock, tied between two trees in a yard. An owl lands on one of the trees at her head, and an owl lands in another tree on her foot, and the owls start talking to each other, hooting back and forth, hoot, 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 and she's in the middle. She immediately senses this energy flowing through her. She had just talked about her spine. I can't help but visualize her, the spine, the connection between these two trees, between these two owls. I picture a circuit board,
Exactly.
And these components, there's three components. There's two owls and then Susan in the hammock. And are they recharging her battery? And she was very clear that they were working with her energy. Her husband comes home. Her daughter comes home. She points up at the tree and says, "What do you see?" And the husband says, "Well, there's an owl there and there's an owl there." It's like, oh, yeah. It's like, okay. She was, And then after that, she started doing energy healing with her hands. And this is something that had been part of a contact experience that she had conscious memory of being on board a craft and being told by these beings that you were going to do energy healing. So here she is. She has this experience. She's suddenly doing energy healing using her hands. I said, was it Reiki? And she said, no, not quite Reiki. It's like a healing thing. And she just kind of felt like she would just go with it. The fact that this happened on Easter Sunday, she actually said, and she didn't know about this. Like she's not Catholic, and she kind of said to me on the phone conversation, we talked for a long time. She said, "Oh, the Friday before, I remember I had this crazy feeling in my spine. It like hurt." And I said, "God, I feel like I'm being crucified." And I was like, okay, wait a minute. The Friday before Easter, you say you're being crucified. She said, "Yeah." And I'm like, do you see that? And she's like, "No, I don't know. What are you talking about?" I'm like, okay. So there's like even woven into her own story are just these like mythic elements. And there's no deeper day of death and rebirth in the Western calendar than Easter Sunday. Yeah, right. So anyway, so this story is just laid out. And I'll just say, I just talked to a woman over email this morning. I don't want to say too much, who got the book, is reading it, and said that she had a Kundalini awakening on the very same day. That would have been Easter Sunday, 2010. So let's. Okay. So I mean, this stuff just gets layer upon layer and these layers. This is how to say it. There's no you'll go crazy if you try to find a deeper, concrete meaning. Like there's no answer to the puzzle at the end of the day. But what it does to me is it just says, okay, this story feels important. So
now, right. So Susan's story is it's fascinating in and of itself. It's incredible. And it's actually a bookend. And then there's another part of that bookend, which belongs to another woman.
So this woman is named Kelly, and I'm not going to use her last name. And her story arrived to me because I was talking to Suzanne Chancellor, who you know, and I said, gosh, I got this great owl story with this hammock. It's super cool. And then she said, oh, you need to talk to Kelly. So that was less than 24 hours. I think that was the same night, basically, that I heard the story. So I'm put in connection with this other woman, Kelly, and she had actually written the story up as an essay, like a diary entry. And so she was lying in her hammock, and she'd been having unusual life experiences that can be seen in some light. I'm very cautious here because I don't like pigeonholing people if they're, so her experiences might imply the UFO contact experience, and she knew it.
Right.
And so she was sort of like, I need a sign. She was lying in the hammock, and she had good experiences just with this little thing, this little playful thing where she would close her eyes and say, okay, I need a sign. I need confirmation. And she would count down. And then when she got to 1, she would open her eyes, hoping to see something that would give her a sign. She did nothing. She tried it a few times, nothing. And her little son, who I think was 10 at the time, might have been 9, ran out to the hammock and said, Mom, what are you doing? She said, oh, I'm playing a little game, and I'm trying to make something up. I'm trying to have an experience. and it goes like this, where I'll close my eyes and I'll count down. He said, oh, no, let me do it. So this little boy's in the hammock with his mom, and he says, no, let me do it. And they close their eyes, and they go, he says, Dear God, can we see a UFO? And he counts down, and they open their eyes, and there's a shiny, crystalline, like diamond-shaped object off in the distance, hovering just above the trees, full daylight, sparkling in the full daylight sun.
Yeah.
She tells her son, go get the binoculars. Go get the binoculars. So her son runs and runs off and grabs the binoculars and comes back, and they both look at it together, and they're like, whoa. And she describes this thing as something I've heard before, where it had every color in the rainbow, including colors we don't even know about. And then her husband came out, and her husband's sort of a doubter, the way she described it in the context of the story. And so he's like, well, what are you looking at? And so, here, look at the binoculars. See that little thing over there? Look at that. And he was like, uh-oh, like, what is this? And it would really stumped him. Very logical guy, really challenged him. And he took the binoculars, and because the thing was slowly moving, he had to like walk up a little hill. I think it was onto the deck of the house, and to get a better view as this little thing was moving away.
Right.
So, and she treats that experience as a very powerful awakening confirmation event.
Sure, of course.
As does Susan Kornacki.
Yes.
Now, these women, that didn't happen the same year. It was a few years apart. But these women, they gave me where they both since moved, I think, and they gave me their locations, and I put it on Google Maps. They were 44 miles apart. They lived 44 miles apart, and that we're doing a
remarkably
radio show,
close. In other words,
which is
incredible.
In a great big world. That's remarkably
exactly.
close, and this is a radio show, so there's not much we can do here. But if I was to put their 2 photographs side by side, they're not quite twins, but they certainly look like sisters.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you can back me up on that, and they actually knew each other. They were friends on Facebook.
Yeah. And they did not know each other's particular story, though, the hammock story.
Neither of them knew their hammock story. So here's like the most benign of like things in a backyard, the hammock. And it somehow, like it's holding these 2 stories together. Both their experiences took place in a hammock. One was a woman lying in her hammock having a confirmation event with owls. The other one was a woman lying in her hammock having a confirmation event with a UFO. And the stories arrived so close. And this is like almost a little aside that may not mean much, but I think it was the night after I wrote up the essay completely and ran it by both Susan and Kelly, and they gave me some feedback, and I incorporated that feedback into the final text. I woke up in the middle of the night, just sat bolt right up, and I kind of was like, this hammock thing is the most important thing of the entire research. And then I laid back down and went to bed. Now I don't know if that's true or not, but that was a powerful sort of jolting thing for me just to come out of a sound sleep and say that. So,
yeah.
And I have a number of accounts like this. There's a back-to-back account with these 2 women on a balcony. There's a back-to-back account.
Can't go into it right now. I have to interrupt you, Michael. I'm so sorry.
Oh, no, please do.
We're at the bottom of the hour. I'm so glad you got to tell that story, and we can pick up the next one, and maybe we can also talk a little bit, maybe your own particular experience of your own synchronicity. That's really quite remarkable if we're able to get time in for that. we'll see what we can do. Right now, I'm Richard Dolan here with Mike Clelland, author of The Messengers, Owls, Synchronicity, and the UFO Abductee. Fantastic book. It's at richarddolanpress.com. And also you can look at Mike's site at hiddenexperience.blogspot.com. We're here on KGRA Radio. We'll be right back after a couple of minutes. I'm Richard Dolan here with Mike Clelland, author of The Messengers. Mike, yeah, we were just talking a little bit during the break about how densely packed the book is with just one uncanny story after another. I mean, it's literally impossible, even if we had 4 hours, really to get into all of what you have there. But I think you had a couple that you wanted to get into, or at least that would give a kind of an idea of some more strangeness, I guess we can say, of owls, UFO experience, shamanistic experiences, and so on. So why don't you just take it?
Well, so there's a woman named Rebecca Hardcastle Wright, and I've never met her, but you've met her.
I have indeed.
Yeah, I had a long conversation with her on the phone. She seemed wonderful.
Very intelligent, very wonderful lady.
Yeah, so she it's so funny, like you get this little like. So here's something that like I gotta say is like I feel like I didn't write this book. I feel like this stuff just arrived in my lap in this just synchronistic cloud, one story after another, just the right time, just the right story, and like I didn't have to go to any like archives or libraries or anything like that. All I had to do was get up in the morning and make a cup of coffee and open my email inbox, and this stuff just poured out. It went on for years, and I couldn't use. I mean, if any story that shows up in the book is part of a larger collection of stories, the thing that would back it up. So there's really no one-offs in the story. There's a few, and I point those out when there are, but all of these things are kind of backed up. So anyway, Rebecca told me the story where I can't remember what year it was. It was going back a few years, and she was living in Phoenix, Arizona. There's another death and rebirth right there, Phoenix.
Yes, sure.
So there's a symbolism there. So she's kind of this was early on before she had written her book. She authored in 2008. She had authored a book called Exoconsciousness. It was before the book came out. But she was very well aware of her own contact experiences at that point. So she comes out of kind of a bland suburban strip mall. She's walking to her car. She looks up at the light post. There's a huge owl up there looking down at her. And she receives a psychic communication, telepathic voice from the owl that very clearly says, "You are not who you seem to be." And then she said she felt that all too familiar sensation. She was very aware that night she was going to have a contact event, and she did. Now, like that, that gets about as mystical as it gets, to have like, it's like the sage on the side of the path.
Yes, exactly.
The knights of the, are riding down, and it mumbles, "You are not who you seem to be," as.
And for anyone who doesn't know, I mean, you've spoken with Rebecca. I've met her a number of times. She's not simply a PhD. She's an exceptionally, I think, conscientious and just sharp person who's totally engaged in this world. And I mean, she's not she's not just an airy-fairy, new agey type of. Oh yes, I mean, she's very, very together, in my opinion.
Yeah, and her story is sort of back to back with someone who is, I don't know, that airy fairy new age is a very strong way to put it. But so there's I
didn't mean to sound disparaging. Actually, it really didn't come out right. But that's a very big thing in this field of ours, and you might hear that more often from someone who's really like very distinctly in that area. And Rebecca, she's not nuts and bolts like I would be, for example, but she's very grounded indeed. Yeah.
So, but I mean, that told me a lot, that sort of, there's such a mystical aspect to this stuff. There's a fellow, I don't know if have you ever interviewed him? David Weatherly?
Yes, well, I've chatted quite extensively with David. We know
Yeah,
each
he's
other.
an amazing researcher, an amazing guy,
Yeah.
and he doesn't really come out and say it. He's certainly said it, and he'll say yes if you ask him, but he keeps it kind of under the radar. But he is a shaman, and I've talked with him, and he talks about his apprenticeship and the years he spent in
Hmm.
traveling to all across the North America and Russia and I think Norway. I'm not sure, but so he he's very well versed in the uh, Nordic lore of the
Hmm.
shaman. So, but he's also a paranormal researcher. He wrote the book Black Eyed Children, which was a big book for him, and
Right.
then he also has done a fair amount of UFO research. So he was called to the home of a family, a mother and their kids, who were having repeated, ongoing UFO experiences in their house. So he arrives at the house, and he has a little voice recorder. So he had to change. He wanted to put fresh batteries in the voice recorder. So he's looking down at the thing and he's monkeying with the batteries. And as he's sitting there in the front seat of his truck, he hears like an audible thud, and actually feels the car kind of jolt a little bit, and looks up, and there's a great horned owl standing on the hood of the car, staring at him through the windshield.
Unbelievable.
Has that ever happened to you?
Not ever.
Okay, so, well,
Not
no,
ever.
that has never happened to me. I've had a lot of odd owl experiences, but that's never happened to me. So he goes into the house, and he asks the mother, like, what's going on with your experiences, and like, just pragmatic, straight questions. And then at that point, the little boy runs in and like, mommy, it's back. And David's like, well, what's back? And the mother explains, well, there's an owl that's been peeking in the window of the son. And then I've never seen it, but the neighbor has seen an owl hanging out in the yard. And this is, he's describing a great horned owl on the roof of his car. He's not describing a screen memory. It's not a 4-foot tall owl. It's the
Right.
size of a normal, they're fairly big owls in North America, but it's not a 4-foot tall owl. So here's a shaman going to the home of someone who's having UFO contact, and an owl lands on his car. I mean, how do you, like, the layer upon layer upon layer? Where do you? So I don't even try to. All I can really do is point out these things in the context of the book. And the shamanism thing is something that is its own. Like, you start pulling on that thread, and oh my god, it just goes everywhere. Andrea and I, my partner Andrea and I, saw an owl, which is another long story. If we had another hour, I would be happy to tell that one. But so she comes home from. She's out. She comes home. The one parking spot where she always parks is full, so she has to park in a different parking spot. She looks in a tree and sees an owl. She gets on her phone. It's like, Mike, call me. Or come out right now. There's an owl.
Mm-hmm.
So it's wintertime. We stand outside. I have a camera. I'm taking pictures of this owls. She has this, like, I guess, so the shorthand term, she has a download experience. She sees this owl. She has this sensation that things are changing, things are warping, time comes to a standstill. I'm standing right over her, taking pictures of the owl. At the exact same moment, she's seeing the owl, like, radiating a magenta aura. I see nothing, none of this. None of it shows up on the camera. And she's standing right in front of me going like, oh God, this is weird. It's getting weird.
Yes.
Something's happening. Now, to tell the story correctly, I would have to go on for the next 20 minutes, and then just the litany of other strange things that are all connected to this stories that are so similar that they boggle the mind, that just kind of land in our laps, and the timing and the full moon and the dates and other people's owls experiences. It's just,
and actually the real strength in how these stories are typically told in your book is in your very ability to unpack all of these very odd details and true synchronicities and just oddities about the story. It's one thing to look at it on a surface level, but what I think you do so very well, this is just because of good digging and investigation on your part, I think, there are very, very deep and crazy connections somehow, often that come up with these stories that really make you just pause and wonder, like, what is it that's actually happening here? I think the most powerful of them, frankly, is your own story, in which you call your confirmation event. And if I just may jump in and say, like, I think in the process of, if I'm not mistaken, in the process of you delving into the owls, you've also gone through the process of delving into your own experiences, both visual and I think in much more up close and personal contact experiences. And this has all been, you've been unpacking this in yourself. But I think what you describe as your confirmation event is the coup de grace of the entire book.
Well, that's the final couple of chapters in the book is my confirmation experience. And
I don't think it's possible to do it in the next 15 minutes.
No, it can't be done. I can give you a little brief. So, I was coming home from a UFO conference, driving home from a UFO conference in March of 2013. It's not very long ago. And slept out on the side of the road and woke up in the middle of the night, which is something I do. I mean, I worked in the outdoor industry and I slept. It's totally normal for me to sleep out under the stars. And looked up at this hillside. This is in rural, whatever. Southern Utah is very dusty and open and rural. And so I'm very much alone. I'm not near a, the interstate or anything like that. So I'm lying there, and I wake up in the middle of the night, and I look up at this hilltop, and there's this big round building at the top of this hill, right near where I'm lying. It's pretty far away. It's a totally clear, calm night, so perfectly electrically vivid. And I say to myself, and that looks just like a landed UFO. Mm-hmm. And I say, hey, I'm psychic. I feel like I'm tapped into this stuff. I feel like I've got this groovy side to me. Like, if this is a UFO, I'm going to know it. So I kind of just tap into my own psychic aura. I don't know what you would say. And then I just say, I don't feel anything. I rolled over and went back to sleep. And I rolled over 3 more times that night and sat and stared at this thing, and I've spent a lot of time looking at the stars and lying out at night and stuff. And I know what it means to wake up in the middle of the night and see something and stare at it. So it wasn't like it was just a glance at something. I just laid there staring at this thing for probably, all total over an hour.
Was this when was there a coyote? Am I remembering this correctly?
There was a coyote. Yes, there's a coyote. One of the times I woke up, there was a coyote right near my head. And again, I've slept out under this. This was I cannot believe I didn't see the coyote. It was so close, yapping, howling away. I wasn't scared at all. It was a magical experience. And it felt like I could take a little dog bone and throw it to this coyote and it would land in its mouth. And at the same time, I'm looking at this round structure. So anyway, I wake up the next morning. A few other things happen. I wake up one time and there's lights near me. And then I drive home the next morning. And when I get home, I'm like, I wonder what that house was. And so I look up on Google Maps and there's nothing. And if there was a house up there, you'd be able to see it. I'm very skilled with maps. I'd be able to find the road. I'd be able to find where where the house was. There'd have to be phone lines going up to the house and power lines. There'd be evidence.
Yeah,
there's
but nothing at all. Not in any maps.
Yeah,
it was just not there.
So I made a blog post. I drew a very clear representation of my image. I posted the GPS coordinates of exactly where I was lying and everything like that on my blog.
The implication is simply that you appear to have seen a very large landed craft which had the intense lights, because there was obviously no house there that had any kind of lights.
Yeah, so that's the implication, though.
Right.
And then I have since gone back to that exact spot, and there's nothing there, which I knew there wouldn't be. Right. And then after that, that day, the day I posted the thing on the blog, the day I drew a picture of it, I had a psychic flash while standing in my home. I saw a very clear map with 3 dots on a map, and I line up these things. And one event wasn't I had an experience where sounds like a classic abduction experience. Floated out of a tent. In a white realm, feeling total terror. So that's a long story, but that culminated with going to a sweat lodge ceremony with a shamanic ceremony in a sweat lodge. So we have this shamanic aspect. We have, and then another dot on that thing, which took me a while to actually figure that one out, because I couldn't. Wow, there must have been some experience. And so I'm lining these things up on a map. I'm very skilled with maps, and that experience, a friend of mine saw an orb. Her name is Natasha. She saw an orb while I was listening to a great horned owl. And these things line up electrically perfect on this map. And
You line them up on Google Maps, and it's absolutely precise. These 3 events are in an exact straight line across, I don't know how many hundreds of miles.
231 miles. Yeah, from
Exactly.
one place takes place in western Colorado, and the other one takes place in eastern Utah, and then
And
then there's one in the middle.
Talking within feet or even inches, because
it would be
that level of precision.
Well, that would have never been able to, if we turn the clock back like 5 years before the advent of Google Maps, I would have had to use a big paper map and a pencil, and that pencil line on a map may have been a mile wide. So I would have had some level of precision, but not what I can get with Google Maps.
You were literally like sleeping on this razor thin line, this invisible line in a straight line from each of these 3 places were exactly lined up.
So when that happened, when I lined those things up, like my life changed. Like my life, like the old me that chapter had closed, the book was closed. The new me, that chapter, just that brand new book. And it was like, my God, this is real. This really happened. I cannot deny. People would laugh at me. I mean, Leo Sprinkle did a huge belly laugh to me in my face, which is a very charming guy, and he could pull it off. It would be rude if anyone else did it. But, basically when I said, I don't think I'm a UFO abductee, and he just laughed. Now, and at this point, I'm, I can't deny.
No, what are the experiences
I could deny the other experiences. Yeah.
You remembered being floated out of a tent. That was one of the 3 experiences.
One of the 3 dots in the map.
Part of it. Yeah, one of the 3 dots. I
managed to push that away. I managed to deny that completely.
Right.
And I've had people, people would just laugh at me, like, dude, you were abducted. And I'm like, well, I can't be sure. And I mean, I had a weird scratch. I mean, there was there's all this stuff that's right out of the
You did end up having a fairly clear recollection of it, seems to me. But I think it took you a little while. But you had that abduction experience, or being taken, hearing the great horned owl, while at the same moment Natasha was having the orb experience.
Yeah,
that was on one, and then the first dot of the map having the sighting of what looked like a house, which wasn't a house, and that was evidently a landed UFO. All precisely in a straight line with razor thin exactness, 231 miles apart.
So I mean, it was
that's extraordinary.
At that point, I ceased. I was capable of denying these weird events until that moment, and then it was just like, okay, denial is not an option. It's confirmed. Absolutely, this is real. And now the thing that's strange is, I had to make a map. I had to sleep outside. I had to sleep in a so and these are things I do. I mean, I love
these are all
outside.
Things that you do. Other people would not have been able to get these clues. Other people would not have been skilled with the maps, or other people would not have been outside. This was designed for you.
Designed for me and me alone. So I was confronted with clues that were placed. I mean, a psychic vision was projected into my mind. That is as frank and clear and truthful as I can be. A psychic image was projected in my mind for all of 1 second. Click on, click off. There, I had it.
Right.
I had to decipher what that meant. And so in the book, there's a handful of other things, and this is a term I use in the book called orchestrated clues. And other people have confronted the same thing, and they are equally as absurd at times. There's one woman who had the experience where it was a catfish in an aquarium ate a cucumber in the shape of a triangle, and it was her confirmation moment in a way.
Exactly,
which is absurd and ridiculous. There's a long story that associated with that, but that was.
I know that story well, and it's fascinating, and you're exactly right. There are a series of clues for her that only she really could have gotten, that took her into this incredible realization. And again, you get this feeling that there's, orchestrated clues. I think that's right. Something is orchestrating these things.
And the clues that I was confronted with were exactly the stuff that delighted me. owls and coyotes. I mean, there's nothing that in the two animals in North America that have the most folklore around them are owls and coyotes, and there they were at two of the separate spots. And the third spot was a shamanic sweat lodge experience run by a Native American down in the Hopi or down in the Navajo reservation.
Yeah.
So,
look, we have only a couple of minutes left, and I'm wondering if we can try. I mean, to draw some implications out of what this research really means. What does it mean to you? How is it? How do you perceive reality now, having gone through this research and writing out all of these accounts, including your own?
Well, curiously, I'm a lot calmer. I mean, I feel like I was a bit. Years of my life were spent in this introspective, where the wheel was just grinding in my head, like, this can't be true, but it's true. It can't be true. Something happened, but it couldn't have happened. The tape loop was just stuck. And in doing this book, I untangled the threads that were confining and knotting up my own psyche in a way. And I feel like I emerged out of the book a more spiritual person. That spiritual is a kind of an easy term to use, and I'm not sure exactly what it means, but I feel like I'm a more open-minded and more far-seeing. I mean, that's sort of sounds lofty, but I feel like I'm capable now in a way that I wouldn't have been before, partially just because the chatter in my own mind would have been blocking me from seeing. It feels like I can see just a little further down towards the vantage point on the highway. So I've changed. The book changed me. Like, there was a nervous, introspective, frightened person who started the book, and there was a more secure, hopeful person that finished the book.
Well, that's very interesting that you've gone through. It's a definite growing experience, clearly. The thing that I keep wondering is, what is guiding our reality? And I want to read the quote by Nick Redfern about your book. And Nick is one of our best authors and researchers. He's written many.
And let me add that Nick did the initial edits, less on the copy and more on the overall narrative flow of the book. So he read the book twice, and I think you, me, Nick Redfern, and Suzanne Chancellor are the only people who have actually. Well, now book's been out for a week or so, a few days, excuse me. So there's probably other folks out there who have read it, but those are the only three people who have read the book, and so Nick, had read the book twice at that point.
What he said, and this is a really telling statement, I think it's true. He says, I get the strong sense that Mike Clelland was guided to write this by UFO intelligences. I believe the phenomenon intended it to be written. He said that about you in this book. And, well, just the idea of, like, what is guiding our reality. You were guided, and I think that seems right, and the stories, a story upon story upon story that comes through here gives the same type of a sense that there is a guiding hand somewhere. Not that we're all controlled necessarily completely, but that there's an intelligence interacting and observing and tweaking and testing and communicating.
So what happened was, there came a point this summer, I think it was late July, when I had the manuscript in a form that I felt, near complete.
You got about 1 minute. I sent
it off to Nick, and at that point, all the email inbox stories ceased. Dead halt. They had been arriving about one a day for 3 years. I send the manuscript off to the editor, 0. They've since kind of charged back up again, but
that's incredible.
It was a very, very palpable and strange thing for me to recognize.
That is fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. Mike, you've been a fantastic guest. Mike Clelland's website is hiddenexperience.blogspot.com. I strongly recommend you go check it out. He's got great blog entries, and his podcast is available. You can read all about him. You can also learn about the book at my website, richarddolanpress.com. It's right on the splash page. You can't miss it. Mike, thank you very, very much for being here.
Thanks so much. It's been a joy.
It's my pleasure. With that, it is time to say goodnight. I want to thank my guest, Mike Clelland, my producer, Race Hobbs, the good people in the chat room, and to you on the other end of the connection. I am Richard Dolan. I'm looking forward to the next time we're together. Now, stay tuned for 3 hours of Fade to Black featuring Jimmy Church. Good night.